Right. So Riku asked me to come talk at HelSec, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to try a new topic that I haven't talked about ever on stage before. It's probably going to be a few people. It's not a few people. That's okay, because it's an important topic. I've been thinking about leadership a lot lately. and maybe from the point of view, and how do you hack leadership? How do you get to a point of understanding, both in terms of what it means to be a follower and what it means to be a leader? When I look out into this room, when I look into any room I talk to, I see potential. I see future leaders. I see people who will take leadership positions either formally in employment or in friend groups or in hobby groups or at home. I see people who could use a level of understanding of what it means to be a leader, of what it means to think about leadership. So I figured I'd set this slide deck together, and I hope it'll make sense to you. It made sense in my head when I was putting it together. But like I said, this is the first time I'm running a topic on what this means to me, or how I perceive leadership within cybersecurity. And it's not an easy topic to talk about. Like most things in life, there's always somebody who said it better first. Arthur C. Clarke is an author and talks about a multitude of things. But for most of us in cybersecurity, technology is the thing we start with. It's the thing we operate. It's the thing we use to compensate for human nature. I almost want to use a different word, but I won't, because that's the thing. And when we think about leadership, or we think about how we control or manage large groups of people, we usually fall back on technology. There was this quote I saw on social media, or this guy that was talking about how most of the problems we have left can't be solved by logic. And most of the issues we face are being tackled with logic, because the larger the company, the harder it is to justify anything irrational. The harder it is to take risks or take chances due to intuition or experience or anything else, because you need to be able to go in front of the board or go in front of the leadership team and tell them that I had good logical reasons for making the decisions I did. Otherwise, you're going to lose your position. So that's what we do. We engineer the solutions, and then we end up in these really problematic situations where we're trying to use awareness to stop phishing. We're trying to use awareness to get our users to understand cybersecurity. We're thinking that everybody needs to be a cybersecurity expert in an organization where we have marketing people, HR people, people whose job we don't understand. We don't care enough to try to understand. So if I can influence anything today with this talk, I hope compassion and empathy towards everybody else in the organization is the thing that you take away from it. It's not intended to be anything besides that. And from my point of view, leadership is the key to enabling that culture, empowering that culture within our communities, within the area of influence that all of us have, that all of us are able to, well, impact, essentially. So let's see. This story starts in the 1940s, because I'll take any opportunity to remind people to fight Nazis. So let me take you back to the early 1940s, during the height of the World War, to a place called Bletchley Park outside of London, when Europe was in chaos. The Allied forces were facing a seemingly unsurmountable challenge. The German military was using an encryption device known as the Enigma machine, and some of you may have heard about it. It's the foundation for most of our encryption, right? Its codes were believed to be unbreakable. These encrypted messages allowed the Nazis to communicate securely, orchestrating attacks with devastating precision. And breaking the Enigma could turn the tide of war. But it was a monumental task. The code was complex. It would change daily. It had billions of possible combinations, and the stakes were as high as they could get. It was the foundation of how the Nazis were able to communicate without revealing what they were talking about. Failure meant losing the war, and victory was slipping through the fingers of the Allies. Now, this is where leadership comes in. Not just the kind of leadership that issues command, not just the kind of leadership that stands in an ivory tower and barks for the subordinates to do things. Leadership that identified the right people and put them in the right place to solve an impossible problem. I'm talking about Alan Turing, who put together a team of weirdos, hackers of their time. A mathematician with an unconventional way of thinking. He wasn't an obvious choice. He wasn't even a military officer, or he wasn't exactly accepted by the establishment as the right person for the job. Many thought he didn't fit, but he was brilliant. He was relentless, and he had a vision. He had an understanding that if it was built by humans, it could be broken by humans. It could be, or there was a perceived opportunity for vulnerability. Now, he understood that solving the enigma would require more than a few minds working in isolation. So he gathered a bunch of other weirdos, a bunch of other hackers into Bletchley Park for a program that was kept secret long after the war. And there's a few things that needs to be understood about this team. It was not only mathematicians or strategists or people versed in espionage or opportunities. There were linguists, chess champions, and even crossword puzzle like enthusiasts, people who had a knack for seeing patterns, people who thought differently, people who took risks in achieving the goal that they wanted to achieve. People who wanted to use their unique skills for the sole purpose of breaking this code, breaking this unbreakable machine. And this means that a few things happened, right? We had military leadership that believed in Turing, that believed in this weird guy. And we had Alan Turing that was visionary enough, empathic enough, that he gathered a team that was diverse in its fundamental meaning, not in terms of anything besides the substance of the skills. A diverse group of people with a diverse perspective on a unique challenge. And together, under his leadership, they developed a machine. The machine was called the bomb, which I find fitting, but it could decipher the Enigma code at the end of the day. And there's a movie about this that dramatizes it, and there's a lot of historical texts that go into the detail of how they developed the machine, what the breakthroughs were, and everything around it. There's an intense historical context around Alan Turing himself. He was a minority in many senses of the word. The breakthrough at Bletchley Park is credited by shortening the war by at least 2 years. It's historically perceived to be the turning point or the pivot point of the Second World War. It's the point when the Allies started intercepting the Nazi code, started understanding their movements, their troop setups. And it all stemmed from this unique way of thinking, this unique way of solving problems. Unfortunately for Turing himself, it didn't end so well. He was dishonorably discharged and made fun of for many years until the history truly came out. But to me, this is an illuminating experience from history about what true leadership means. We have an impossible challenge, impossible code, a secure encryption device that enables bad things to happen on a scale that hasn't been seen. And we have a unique mind that puts together a team of weirdos, of hackers, of people like us that band together around impossible problems and end up changing the world. And I think that's inspiring in and itself. So, what does this have to do with cybersecurity and leadership? Well, I think the parallels are quite obvious. We're in a university building where we are striving people to think critically, where we're teaching people to solve hard problems, to push the boundary of our understanding, of our knowledge, to achieve a unprecedented understanding of the world. We have a society that is brave enough to invest into that and allow for us to take meaningful lessons out of it. But more than that, Turing's leadership wasn't about hierarchy or fitting into a traditional mold. It wasn't about wearing a suit and a tie and having your car parked in the car park for the most hours. It was about producing results with a diverse set of minds, producing meaningful results. And it wasn't broken by one person. It wasn't Alan Turing. It was the team that worked together to achieve that goal. So, when I contrast that with where we are today, I work at the Volvo Group as the vice president for cybersecurity validation, essentially. I sit on the board of a few startups. I'm the founder of the Disobey organization, and I have a few companies of my own. So I get to see what leadership looks like on the really low level and what it looks like on enterprise level, where you need to scale everything, where you can't do anything in manual steps. And often I find myself in a situation where it feels like I'm repeating. I'm telling people the same thing over and over and over again. And I think it's not because I'm not making myself clear. I think it's because we don't really understand what our job is, or most of us at least. And I don't want to expose anybody or or put anybody on the spot. But I was a lot like that, especially when I was coming up. When I was a junior in a team, I felt like, because my senior managers were doing decisions that I didn't understand, that they were the idiots, because I wasn't humble enough to understand that I didn't have the full context. I didn't understand what was going on the higher levels of the organization. And I wasn't privy to the information that would have made the irrational choices make sense in a rational way. I tried to engineer my understanding of the company, of the organizations I worked in. But I think we have a fundamental problem. I think we've stopped talking honestly about things that are outside of or inside of our control within the organizations where we operate. If I think about the first time I've been in a boardroom for a global company, and I've been tasked with explaining cybersecurity, and I've been like super excited. Like I'm going into this room with all these people that can make decisions about the direction of this entire thing. And my thinking has been that I'm gonna tell them things that they don't understand. I'm gonna be able to be a voice of reason in a room full of idiots that can't really see the full picture of what's important. Because I'm a cybersecurity guy. I know the threats of the world. I understand the hackers. I understand what's actually important, which again is a testament of my hubris, my inability for compassion and empathy towards everything else that the company also needs to do. Everything else that is important for the company to accomplish, for me to be able to do my job. At the end of the day, they're paying my salary, right? They get to dictate what's important. We are not the most important person in the room. We're an important voice in the room, especially in the boardroom or in senior leadership. We're not the only voice there. We're not the most important voice there. We are a part of the team. We are a part of the other weirdos that have jobs that we don't understand. Where they go, like, I don't understand why I keep repeating the same thing to the cybersecurity idiot who's just talking about how we need to fix the critical vulnerabilities right now, because otherwise the world will burn. Because they have a bunch of other topics that will also lead to the world burning, which, if you start thinking about it in that sense, should put you on another path of thinking altogether. We're not about perimeter defenses anymore. We're not about firewall rules. We're not about the technical aspects of specific problems. We're about securing society. We're about enabling business to function in an increasingly unstable world, where if we fail at our communication, we fail at contextualizing what we want to explain in these really important rooms, things could go very bad. And it's not because they're stupid and can't understand. It's because we didn't take the time to understand what's important and contextualized our message accordingly. And that's a hard lesson. That's a hard thing to admit. Maybe there's stuff that I need to learn more about that are outside of my domain knowledge, outside of my domain-specific understanding. Yeah. And that's the leadership paradox. I mean, if I, as a leader, come to you with a problem, I don't have the solution to that problem. I expect you to solve that problem. If you, as somebody who works for the company or for me, come to me with a problem and expect me to solve that problem for you, then you're doing what's called putting a monkey on my back in leadership literature, which you should never read. It'll hurt your brain and you'll want to kill yourself. But there's some things that make sense. And I think there's this divide between working together and working against each other and working towards a common goal that is being missed in the discussion. To me, good leadership isn't about orders and direction. It's about serving the team. It's about enabling the team to raise to their potential, to find solutions, to enable them to be who they want to be within the context. Now, there's a lot of good examples that I could use here for where a team independently can solve a problem better than when the leader is involved. But in the interest of time, since I still, or I'm on slide 5 and I've talked for half an hour by now, we should probably move on and talk about the human element. The point of it all. Why are we here? Why are we not sitting at home reading a book? Why are we not looking at this on YouTube? What is the benefit of us coming together as a community? Well, there's many. A lot of these topics could be taught to us by AI, but for whatever reason, it's more intriguing. It's more captivating when you hear it from another person, a person with limited experience and some understanding of some topics. But all of you have some information, some knowledge that I don't have. All of you can teach me something about how the world works, about what's important in your context, in your understanding. That's the larger point. The compassion and empathy towards areas of interest that aren't necessarily super aligned with what we find interesting right now. That's another hard lesson. It's not easy to be vulnerable enough to say that you can learn from everyone, especially when you're in a position of power. That leads to us expecting very little from our leaders today. Like, most of us have an understanding of what it means to work for a horrible boss. Somebody who takes all the credit and gives nothing in return. All we need to do is look at the American election to see how far it can go, where people with no redeeming qualities can be considered for one of the highest positions in the world. How do we get to this point without somebody going like, what the fuck is going on? Like, beyond me. Also not the topic of this talk. This is, like I said in the beginning, when I look into this room, when I look into any room, what I see is potential. I see future leaders who can raise up to their potential, who can become more than what they or you perceive that you could be right now, who can lead a team of diverse talent, who can solve an unsolvable problem, who can, in the right leadership, become something truly inspiring for the rest of us. And we can work together to enable that for all of us. It's always faster to go alone, but you always get further together. And that's the point. That's the potential. So we need to start having an honest discussion. And there's this graph that we can use, where on the left side, you have people who are nice, and on the right side, you have people who are kind. And the difference is that if you're nice, you're not really being honest. You're working off of a position of self and a position of low caring, where you don't care about the other person, you care about yourself. You care about avoiding the conflict. You care about not having the hard discussion at the expense of the growth of the other person. And when you're kind, you give people opportunities to grow. You give people opportunities to fix problems within their behavior. You give people an opportunity to recognize patterns. And once you've pointed out a pattern for someone, it becomes a choice for them whether or not they want to continue operating according to that pattern. And this is really hard, because most people who are daring, courageous, they fall back on playing to dominate when things get tough. Or if they care a lot, but they're not super courageous, they fall back on playing not to lose. And I'm sure you can find yourself in this graph. I'm sure if you think about it, you can find your leaders in this graph. And if you really think about it, I'm sure all of us want to play to win. We want to be in an environment where we're given honest feedback, candid feedback, given an opportunity for growth, being seen for who we are and what our potential is, instead of being told, that was a good job, and then half a year later getting terminated because nobody bothered to tell you that you're actually not really good at what you're doing. It's fucked up. And I've seen it a lot of times where somebody comes into a new organization and they think they're hot shit. They go, everything I touch turns to gold. Like, I don't even need to prepare. I'm just gonna do a little bit and I'm the coolest person there is. And then everybody plays along for a while. Then they get tired of it. And then instead of giving them opportunity to grow, giving them opportunity to actually become as good as they think they are, people just start talking behind their back. People slowly stop inviting them to meetings. People stop looking at their output, and eventually they get fired for not being a culture match, or creative differences, or what have you. And I hope you'll be brave enough, courageous enough, and caring enough to have the hard discussion. Do not fall back on, I don't want to feel uncomfortable giving these people honest feedback, because that does no one any good, least of all you. So, Google's Project Aristotle, named after one of my favorite philosophers, maybe after Plato, came up with 5 specific measures that work in a healthy and good work environment. At the top of the list is psychological safety. Right after that is dependability, structure and clarity, meaning and impact. These are things that teams need to be able to operate at peak performance, operate in a way that make sense, that give people meaning. And in the coming years, you're going to hear a lot about the psychological safety aspect of it, because that's probably the most important thing. If you don't allow people to fail, they'll never get better. If you don't encourage people to take risks, we're all going to fall back on the logical, safe solutions, and we're going to keep running into the same walls because we're not really doing anything meaningful or driving impact or change. So, what's a good boss? What's a good leader? Michael Scott is widely regarded as probably not that good of a manager or in terms of execution. But if you look at the characteristics of what good leadership is, and think about it in terms of empathy, adaptability, trustworthiness, and vision. Michael has all of those. I'm going to repeat that. Empathy, adaptability, trustworthiness, and vision. That's what it's essentially about. If you look at the show, and you should because it's funny, you'll realize that he's not super good in terms of producing results for the company. But he is a caring human being that is somehow one of the most empathic persons on the show. He cares about his team. He gives them opportunities to sell paper in an environment where it's safe to fail. Yeah. So, as my almost last point, there's an element of growth mindset that I want to plant the seeds for in this room, where you stop thinking in terms of whether or not something is achievable or you can do something, and start thinking about problems in terms of, I can't do that yet. I'm not there yet. All I need to do is figure out how to solve X, Y, and Z. Stop thinking about things in terms of a static mindset where you think you can't learn, or where you think you already have all the answers, or where you don't need to have compassion for the rest of the environment or context you operate in. And build this into the personality or the person that you want to be. Somebody who overcomes obstacles, finds solutions, empowers other people, has empathy and compassion for your coworkers and your team, and together grow smart setups. On a practical level, like you could start with smarter goals. How do you set a goal? Be specific, create something measurable, make sure it's attainable, relevant, time-bound, evaluate it frequently, and readjust as needed. This is my way of, or aligns with my way of thinking. It's easy for me to remember these like acronyms that spell out something. You could also just use SMART or whatever else. This helps me structure my goals. Something specific, something I can measure, something where I can look back and go, I achieved that specific thing because my measurement for it was whatever it is, something that's actually attainable. Like, if you make things too out of reach, then you're just going to demotivate yourself. But also tie it to a point in time. So it's not, I'm going to be a millionaire in 50 years. It's more like, I'm going to create an investment strategy where my dividends pay pence or 1 cent a day. And then I'm going to increase that to 2 cents a day. For the people who are smarter than me, can calculate math. To get to 1 cent a day, you need about like 150 euros in your dividend stock. So it's like an attainable goal for most people. Like I said, there's always somebody else who said it smarter. John Maxwell describes a good leader as a person who takes a little more than his share of the blame and a little less than his share of the credit. And I like that. I think that's a good way of structuring this entire discussion, pulling it all together and explaining what leadership means to me. Thank you. Are we doing questions and answers or just starting to...
Yeah, I can ask a question first. So, in cybersecurity leadership, does it matter the leader has to be good at technical skill plus leadership skill?
It depends on the size of the organization. So, if you trust your team and you have good subject matter experts, you don't necessarily need to be a technical leader to be able to achieve good results in cybersecurity. It helps. It helps a lot because the problems in cybersecurity are inherently complex and hard to intuitively understand. What compounds the issue is a lot of times the metrics we present to senior leadership are very vanity-based, things that are easy to measure but don't really explain or answer any meaningful question. So unless your leader is smart enough to understand that they need to ask for what they should measure and how they should measure it, you could easily end up with looking at something that is not beneficial for the security of the organization. But it's not a necessity. If you're a good leader, you listen to your team and you trust your team, and then you direct that competence to something that is meaningful for the company or the organization you operate in. If you, however, if you work in a company where there's 10 people employed, and your cybersecurity leader should do most of the cybersecurity work, then they absolutely need to be technical and have an understanding of what it means. Good question, though.
Hi. So as an aspiring leader, maybe in the future, something that discourages me to consider this, and which also ties to your last slide quite nicely, taking, let's say, a bigger share of the blame. What's your opinion on incidents like the Uber CISO who was charged by the federal jury for 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and $50,000 fine for the Uber breach in 2016, the SolarWinds CISO who is now being charged by the SEC. Is that something also part of taking larger share of the blame, or?
Oh, shit. Right, so, okay. I think you raise a very valid point. And let me answer it this way. I think it's amazing that for the first time in a really long time, leaders are held accountable for their decisions. I would really hope that the same was true, for instance, for the CEOs of banks, where like it would not only be security leaders that are held accountable for the decisions. In specifically the Uber case, I think it's like the right decision. But let's not get too deep into the technicalities of that question. Really good question. I think we should continue the discussion with some level of adult beverages in our hands.
So first thing to a bit reflect as a person who works in the corporate world for 10 years, you know, I felt when I joined just the corporate world that communication was quite poor when it's coming from the top to the bottom, especially ability to translate the high level vision to the, you know, people who execute the work every day. But then, luckily or unluckily, I'm being born in Ukraine, and I've been, you know, witness of some of the communication that is happening on the top level, on the country levels. And then when you relate, you understand that corporate communication is actually not that bad, considering all the things that are happening. You know. Outside of that philosophical topic, I would like to ask you a different question. So, what's your fun being a leader? What's make you proud? What makes you wake up every day to be a good leader as you are? Thank you.
For me, it's like finding people where I can see potential and allowing them to grow into something that would have otherwise not been possible. Like whether they know it or not, I'm immensely proud for everybody who I've somehow managed to inspire or help or guide somehow. And whenever I see people's success and people, especially when they surpass me or do something amazing that I could have never even dreamed of, it makes me so happy that I have been able to be a part of that journey. Like I don't think I'm the most important person in that journey. I don't think I'm even necessarily a important part of that journey. I'm just happy to have been a part of that journey a lot of times. The other thing is like being able to drive impact at scale that is not possible as an individual contributor. So finding teams, setting up teams, and then enabling those teams to start doing things on a significantly larger scale that would be possible than if I only did it alone. Like Disobey is a really good example. Like if I do an event by myself, it's a birthday party for maybe 20 of my friends. But if I do Disobey with the core team and the volunteers, we are an event that will be hopefully 2,500 people like next year. So the scale and the opportunities that breeds is amazing, and I love that is something that I get to be a part of. I always want to go with the comedy optional. Yeah, well, I mean the paycheck. That's not
so,
true.
Here,
Yeah.
in the back. So a question for a leader like you. If you have a bad leader, how do you work with them so they become a better leader?
You don't.
Okay, so let's throw the leaders out and become leaders ourselves.
Yeah, the point is demand more of your leaders. Like, don't just silently agree to everything that they say. Demand that they raise their level of competence. And like going back to this slide, it's not a one-directional street. Feedback is a dialogue. And you need to hold your leaders accountable for what they're doing, and you need to tell them when they're fucking up so that they can grow and be better as leaders as well. Some leaders are better at taking feedback than others. And if you have a really poor leader, you should probably remove yourself from the equation and go to an environment where you can get a better leader, so that you want to follow them, so that you want to be part of the team, so that you can feel secure in the fact that they will take care of you and defend you when you're not in the room. So essentially, anecdotally, surround yourself with people who defend you when you are not in the room.
Thank you.
Was that the last question? Cool. Thank you so much for having me.